A man worth $400 million does not beg. He commands. He bargains. He writes checks with enough zeros to make problems disappear. What he does not do, what he has never, in 56 years of living, done, is ask a 28-year-old woman in a black apron to save his life. But that is exactly what happened to Edmund Vance on the coldest Thursday in February, in the private dining room of Aubergine, the most quietly powerful restaurant in all of Montreal. Edmund Vance had not built Vance Capital Partners by being sentimental. He had spent 3 decades identifying weakness in other men and turning it into leverage. He had outlasted 2 market crashes, 1 hostile takeover attempt, and a divorce that had cost him $40 million, and he privately admitted almost nothing else. He did not feel things deeply. He felt them strategically. What he could not strategize away was the tremor. It had started 18 months ago. Not with drama, nothing so kind as a sudden collapse that might have given him a clean diagnosis. It had started with his hands, a slight, almost imperceptible vibration in his right hand during a board presentation, easily dismissed as fatigue. Then came the muscle cramps, seizing through his forearms and up into his shoulders in waves that left him white-knuckled and sweating inside his custom shirts. Then the episodes, sudden, catastrophic failures of coordination, where his body would simply override his instructions. His left leg would buckle without warning. A glass would slip from fingers that had been perfectly functional 1 second before. Once, exiting a black car on St. Catherine Street, his knees had folded entirely, and he had gone down on the pavement in front of a junior analyst who had the decency to never mention it again. The specialists at the Montreal Neurological Institute had been thorough, expensive, and ultimately useless. Dr. Alistair Goff, Edmund's personal physician for 11 years and the highest-paid concierge doctor in Quebec, had assembled a team, neurologists, movement disorder specialists, a physiotherapist whose waiting list was 18 months long and whom Goff had somehow procured within a week. They had scanned everything. They had found nothing definitive. What they had found, or rather what Goff had decided it, was anxiety-induced essential tremor aggravated by overwork and caffeine. The prescription was a beta blocker, propranolol, at a dosage that made Edmund feel muffled and slow, like thinking through wet cotton. And when that alone proved insufficient to stop the episodes, Goff had added a second medication, a low-dose muscle relaxant cyclobenzaprine, taken at night. Edmund hated both pills. He took them anyway, because Goff had been calm and certain when he explained the protocol, and Edmund trusted calm certainty above almost everything. Tonight was not a night he could afford uncertainty of any kind. Across the table from him sat Nicholas Parrish, the founding partner of a Vancouver-based infrastructure fund that Edmund's firm had spent 8 months courting. The deal on the table was a co-investment in 3 toll highway projects spanning Alberta and British Columbia. The figure, if everything aligned, was close to $900 million. Edmund needed Parrish to sign a letter of intent before the weekend. 2 competing firms were circling. One of them had already offered Parrish a helicopter tour of the construction sites. Edmund had offered dinner at Aubergine. It was, under normal circumstances, the better play. Aubergine's private room, seated 8, and had been booked by prime ministers, a sitting governor-general, and at least 2 men, who would later be featured prominently in commission reports. It smelled of beeswax and aged oak and something warm that the kitchen kept deliberately vague. It was a room where men felt comfortable, making large, irrevocable decisions. Edmund reached for his water glass and noted, with the particular cold focus of a man who has learned to monitor himself the way a pilot monitors instruments, that his right hand had developed the tremor again. He gripped the glass tighter and continued speaking. Standing just outside the double doors of the private room, a clipboard tucked under her arm, was Sloane Mercer. She was 28 years old and had been working the floor at Aubergine for 14 months. She was not supposed to be working the private room tonight. That was Pascal's assignment. Pascal, who was 43, had 20 years of floor experience and moved through a dining room the way water moves around stone. Pascal had called at 4 in the afternoon with what sounded like genuine food poisoning, and Chef Girard had looked at the roster with the expression of a man doing difficult arithmetic and landed on Sloane. She had said yes before he finished the sentence. The extra gratuity from a private room booking could be the difference between making rent and not making rent. Sloane had learned to do that particular math very quickly. She had not always expected to be doing that math at all. 4 years ago, Sloane Mercer had been in her second year of a combined honors degree in biochemistry and pharmacology at McGill University. She had been, by any reasonable measure, exceptional. She had a professor, Dr. Ewan, who had told her during office hours that she thought in a way that most students took a full graduate degree to develop. Sloane had been applying for a research placement at the Sick Kids Affiliate Program in Toronto when her mother had the accident. Giselle Mercer had been a high school librarian in Laval. She had been careful, practical, and entirely uninsured for what happened: a rear-end collision on the A40 that left her with a fractured vertebra and a spinal cord contusion that stole the use of her left hand and left her with chronic pain that required ongoing treatment. The rehabilitation was expensive. The medications were expensive. The home modifications were expensive. The wait for adequate provincial support was long enough that Sloane's mother had spent 6 months in a private facility that cost $4,000 a month. Sloane had left school at the end of that semester. She had planned to return. She had told her mother and her younger brother, Theo, that she would return. She had told herself that it would be 1 year, maybe 2, and she would have things stable enough to go back. 14 months at Aubergine. The math had not changed as quickly as she'd hoped. She pushed the door open with her shoulder, balancing a tray of amuse-bouche, and stepped into the private room. The room held 6 people: Edmund Vance, Nicholas Parrish, 2 junior associates she recognized as belonging to Vance's firm, and 2 men from Parrish's side who had the permanently alert look of lawyers. Sloane had served rooms like this many times. She knew how to become invisible in them. She set the small plates with careful efficiency, working clockwise from the far end, keeping her eyes on the table. It was not her eyes that caught it. It was her peripheral vision, trained by years of watching a woman lose fine motor control in stages that were at first subtle and then were not. She caught the movement in Edmund's left hand as she reached across to set the last plate. He was gripping his own wrist under the table with his right hand. A deliberate grip. A steadying grip. The kind of grip someone uses when they do not trust their own body to cooperate without assistance. She straightened, stepped back, said nothing. 3 minutes later, she returned to clear the amuse-bouche plates. Edmund Vance was still talking. He was good at it. His voice was measured, his cadence unhurried, and he was telling a story about a previous infrastructure project in Ontario that was clearly calibrated to communicate competence and history. Nicholas Parrish was listening with the cautious attention of a man who had been in enough rooms to know the difference between a genuine story and a pitch, dressed as one. But Edmund's color had changed. Sloane noticed it the way she noticed everything in her mother's health. Not in isolation, not with alarm, but with the flat, experienced registration of someone whose life had required them to become a diagnostician by necessity. The color around Edmund's mouth had gone slightly wrong. a shade under the normal tone. Not blue, nothing so advanced as that, but the color of someone whose circulation was working harder than it should. And his right hand, which had been maintaining the conversation with small, controlled gestures, had gone still. The conversation at the table continued. Sloane moved to the side credenza, set the cleared plates quietly, and did not leave. Dr. Alistair Goff was sitting at the far corner of the table in the way that concierge physicians at expensive dinners always sat, slightly removed from the main conversation, present as a signal rather than a participant. He was a silver-haired man in his early 60s, with the comfortable authority of someone who had never had his professional judgment seriously challenged. He had his phone face down on the table in front of him, and he was currently, Sloane could see, not watching his patient. Edmund reached for his water glass again. He did not make it. His hand struck the edge of the glass rather than the handle, and the crystal tipped and fell. The water spread immediately across the white linen. Everyone looked at the table. Edmund looked at his own hand with an expression that was not embarrassment. Edmund Vance did not appear to be capable of standard embarrassment, but rather a very brief, very controlled flash of something closer to fear. Then his left leg, the leg closest to the table, gave. He did not fall dramatically. He did not go down the way people go down in films, with noise and flailing. He simply ceased to hold himself up on one side. His body tilted, and he caught the edge of the table with both hands, and for a moment he was suspended there, neither seated nor standing, his face absolutely rigid with the effort of not letting anyone in the room see what was happening. "Sir." Sloane was beside him before she had consciously decided to move. "I'm fine." The words came out correctly, but the voice was wrong. Thin, clipped, operating on override. "Dr. Goff." Sloane said it clearly, not loudly, across the table. Goff looked up from his phone. "His left leg has given out. He may be having an episode." She kept her voice completely level. Goff was on his feet and moving around the table with the automatic speed of training, his medical bag already unzipped before he reached them. He crouched beside Edmund, took his wrist, looked at his eyes. "Edmund, can you hear me clearly?" "I can hear you." "I'm not having a stroke." Edmund's voice had stabilized slightly. He was still gripping the table edge. "It's the tremor. I'm going to give you the midazolam," Goff said, reaching into his bag. "Small dose. It'll interrupt the episode." "The what?" Sloane said. Goff looked at her with the polite, dismissive patience of a man who was very used to being the expert in the room. "Please give us some space. What dosage?" Sloane asked. "Excuse me, what dosage of midazolam? And is he currently on cyclobenzaprine?" The question landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Edmund's two associates had pushed their chairs back. Nicholas Parrish had gone very still. Goff was holding the prepared syringe and looking at Sloane with an expression that was cycling between irritation and something he hadn't had occasion to feel in a long time, which was uncertainty. "That is not," he began, "because midazolam and cyclobenzaprine together can cause severe CNS depression in patients who are already exhibiting motor function irregularity," Sloane said. She was not raising her voice. She was not performing. She was stating a drug interaction she had read in a pharmacology textbook in her second year at McGill, and never, in the way of genuinely important information, forgotten. If he's been taking the muscle relaxant daily and you give him a benzodiazepine during an active episode, you risk respiratory depression, especially in someone his age with a long-term beta blocker on board. The room was completely silent. Goff had the syringe in his hand. He had not administered it. His hand, Sloane noted, had not moved toward Edmund's arm. Edmund was looking at her, not with the expression people usually directed at her in this room, the not quite seeing look of someone registering a uniform rather than a person, but with the focused, measuring look of a man who has spent a career deciding very quickly whom to listen to. "Who are you?" he asked. "Sloane Mercer. I'm your server tonight." She looked at Guff. "Has anyone checked the interaction profile on his current protocol?" Guff's jaw tightened. "I assembled his protocol. I am board certified in internal medicine and have been his physician for over a decade." "Has anyone checked the interaction profile?" Sloane repeated, and it was not a question this time. Edmund's grip on the table edge had not loosened, but his eyes had not left Sloane's face. "Don't give me the shot," he said to Guff, quietly, with complete authority. "Edmund, the liability—" "Alistair." One word, the same tone he used in board meetings when the discussion was over. Guff lowered the syringe. Sloane turned fully to Edmund. "Can you sit? If we get you back in the chair and you stay still, your autonomic system will usually, in my experience with my mother, regulate within about 4 to 6 minutes. The episode needs to run through, not be chemically interrupted." "Your mother?" Edmund said. "She has a similar movement disorder. Progressive. I've been managing her medications for 3 years. The 2 lawyers from Parrish's side were standing now, edging politely toward the door. Nicholas Parrish himself had not moved. He was watching Sloane with an expression that was harder to read, thoughtful and not unkind. Edmund sat. It took 7 minutes, not 4 to 6. 7. Sloane stayed beside him, not touching, not hovering, simply present. She talked him through the breathing pattern she had learned, worked best for her mother, slow inhalation, a held pause, controlled release. Edmund did not thank her. He did not make conversation. He simply did what she told him to do, with the focused compliance of a man who had made a decision and was executing it. When the tremor subsided, it left the way it always did, not with a clear ending, but with a gradual quieting, the way a room becomes still after everyone has finally stopped talking. Edmund straightened in his chair. He rolled his shoulders back. He looked at Nicholas Parrish. "I apologize for the interruption," he said. His voice was fully restored, measured, unhurried, entirely in control. "Don't," Parrish said simply. Guff packed his bag in silence. He did not make eye contact with Sloane. He did not make eye contact with Edmund. He sat back down in the corner chair and turned his phone face up. Sloane returned to the credenza, blotted the spilled water from the linen with a fresh cloth, and went to arrange the main course. She had not expected anything to come of it. In her experience, people in rooms like that noticed what was convenient for them to notice and forgot the rest when the door closed. She had done what she would have done in her own kitchen, standing over her mother's chair at 2 in the morning. She went home that night on the metro, thinking about whether Theo's tuition deferral would still be valid if they submitted the hardship application before March. She did not think about Edmund Vance. Edmund Vance, however, was thinking about her. He had a singular habit, which his ex-wife had called infuriating, and which his senior partners called his most valuable professional trait. He remembered details, specific details at specific moments, in the particular way they fit together. It was the quality that had allowed him, at 31, to identify an undervalued port authority in Nova Scotia and build the first significant deal of his career around it. It was the quality that had made him, at 44, the first investor in the room to see the pattern in a set of quarterly reports that everyone else had dismissed as noise. He lay in his hotel suite that night, staring at the ceiling, and thought about the specific quality of what Sloane Mercer had said. Not the emotional texture of it. He had no particular use for emotional textures. The precision of it, the midazolam interaction, the cyclobenzaprine. The phrase CNS depression in patients already exhibiting motor function irregularity, delivered without any pause for self-doubt, without any performance of authority. the way she had redirected his physician, not by arguing, but by asking a question that Goff, he realized, had never answered. He had been on propranolol and cyclobenzaprine for 14 months. He had had episodes, the buckling, the tremors, the crashes, for 14 months. He reached for his phone and spent 40 minutes reading. By midnight, he had found 3 peer-reviewed papers on drug interactions in patients with his medication combination and his symptom profile. By 1 in the morning, he had found a 4th, published the previous year in a Canadian pharmacology journal, that described paradoxical motor dysfunction as a documented, if uncommon, side effect profile in patients with his specific combination of medications and his blood type marker, which was in his chart and which Goff had reviewed. Edmund Vance set his phone down on the hotel nightstand. He stared at the ceiling for a while longer. He had trusted Alistair Goff for 11 years. He had paid him an extraordinary retainer. He had reduced his entire understanding of his own body to whatever Goff told him at their monthly appointments, because Edmund did not have the time or the inclination to question expertise he was paying for. He picked his phone back up and sent his assistant, Margot, a message. Find out everything publicly available about Sloane Mercer, former student at McGill, server at Aubergine. Report by 7 a.m. Margot sent the report by 6:45. Sloane Mercer, Margot had written, was admitted to McGill's Faculty of Science in 2018 with a full entrance scholarship. Dean's List, first year. Award for Academic Achievement, first year. Second year, began a research placement in the neuropharmacology lab. Withdrew from the university midway through second year. Reason cited in the public scholarship records: personal circumstances, no criminal record, no social media presence beyond a private account, current employment, Aubergine, 14 months. One attached note: she has a brother, Theo Mercer, enrolled part-time at Concordia. There's an active GoFundMe from 2022 for their mother's rehabilitation costs. It raised about $12,000 of an $80,000 goal. Edmund read the report twice. Then he called his own lawyer, Paul Carrington, at 7:15 in the morning, which Carrington had learned over 15 years to simply accept. I need you to draft a consulting agreement, Edmund said, for a pharmacological research assistant. 12-month term. The first year's compensation is $1 million, paid in full on signing. There was a silence on the line. Did you say $1 million? Wire transfer on the day of signing. Edmund set his coffee down. There is also a separate matter, a woman in Laval named Giselle Mercer. I want you to identify the best movement disorder specialist in the country, who is not currently her physician. Book a full private assessment, my foundation covers it, and find out what her current cost burden looks like for the next 2 years, and cover it. Edmund. Carrington's voice was careful. Who is this person? Someone who was correct when everyone else in the room was operating on assumption. He paused, including me. Sloane was refilling a salt cellar at the side station when her manager, Henri, appeared behind her with an expression she had never seen on his face, which was the expression of a man who did not know what was happening and found this intensely uncomfortable. There's someone here for you, Henri said. I'm on shift. He says it can't wait. Henri hesitated. It's a lawyer, Sloane. He's in the reception area. He says he represents Edmund Vance. She set the salt cellar down very carefully. The lawyer's name was Paul Carrington, and he was, she would later think, the least dramatic person she had ever met, which was somehow the most surreal part of the entire surreal experience. He did not make a speech. He did not offer a briefcase. He sat across from her at a small table in the empty reception area, set a document in front of her, and explained it in language that was entirely clear. Edmund Vance's firm was offering her a 12-month consulting contract as a pharmacological research liaison, reviewing medication protocols and interaction profiles for the firm's healthcare portfolio companies. The salary for the 12-month term was $1 million, payable in full upon signing. There was also, Carrington explained, a personal addendum. Edmund Vance's charitable foundation would be covering all costs associated with her mother's continued care and Theo's tuition for the next 2 academic years. Sloane read the document twice. Then she read the addendum twice. She thought about the GoFundMe that had raised $12,000 in 2 years. She thought about the deferral letter sitting in her mother's kitchen drawer. She thought about the research placement she had been offered at 20 years old and had never taken. "He wants to know if you have conditions," Carrington said. "1," Sloane said. "I want access to a complete record of his current medication history, going back to when the episode started." She looked up from the document. "Not a summary. The actual files." Carrington made a note. He anticipated that. "He said to tell you the files are already prepared." She signed. Edmund Vance's first appointment with Dr. Yuan Priya, the neurologist Carrington had identified as the leading movement disorder specialist in the country, currently at the University of Toronto, was 3 weeks later. Sloane had spent those 3 weeks doing what she had done for her mother, reading, cross-referencing, building a medication timeline that showed the precise overlap between Guff's prescription changes and the onset of each new symptom cluster. What she found was not, in the end, complicated. It was the kind of thing that is not complicated once someone has looked carefully at all of it in one place. The propranolol had been introduced in week 1 of Guff's protocol. The tremors had begun in week 3. The cyclobenzaprine had been added in month 2, when the tremors hadn't resolved, which was precisely the thing a prescribing physician should have paused over. Because the tremors hadn't resolved, because the propranolol was causing them, and adding a second medication without identifying the first medication as the source was not treatment. It was management of a problem that the treatment itself was producing. She wrote it in a clean, 12-page document, fully cited, with the relevant literature attached. Edmund read it in one sitting. He passed it to Dr. Priya without comment. Dr. Priya read it and was silent for a long moment, and then said, with considerable restraint, that this was a thorough piece of work. Dr. Priya began withdrawing the propranolol in a careful, staged taper. The cyclobenzaprine was discontinued simultaneously. She introduced a different beta blocker at a fraction of the previous dose, monitored Edmund's blood pressure daily, and told him, with the frankness of a doctor who did not consider frankness optional, that they would know within 6 weeks whether the episodes would reduce. They began reducing in 4. By week 5, Edmund had not had a single major episode. By week 6, the tremors were entirely absent. He was standing in front of a window in his Montreal office on a Wednesday morning in April when he registered, with a clarity that hit him like cold water, that he had not gripped his own wrist under a table in 23 days. He sat down at his desk. He thought about what that meant for a long time. Then he called Sloane's direct line. She had an office now, 3 floors below his, a small room with a window that overlooked the McGill campus, and asked if she had a few minutes. She came upstairs with a notepad, because she had learned in 14 months of working at Aubergine to always have something to write on. Edmund was standing at the window. He did not turn around immediately. "The episodes are gone," he said. "I know." Dr. Priya updated the shared file. "I've been thinking about what that means," he said. 14 months. I restructured my entire company's decision-making structure around the assumption that I was going to deteriorate. He paused. I reduced my travel schedule. I declined 2 deals I would have otherwise pursued. I told my daughter that I might need her to be more involved in things going forward." He stopped. "She changed her own work schedule around that conversation." Sloane said nothing. "None of that was necessary," Edmund said. "No," she agreed, "but you didn't have the right information." He turned away from the window. He looked at her with the same expression he had used in the private dining room at Aubergine. The focused, assessing attention of someone making a very fast and very consequential decision. "I'd like to offer you the research placement," he said. "Not through the firm. Through McGill. I have a relationship with the development office. We can endow a chair in the pharmacology department that comes with a funded research position. You would complete your degree while holding the position. The compensation remains at your current level." Sloane looked at him for a moment. "Why?" she asked. "Because you were right, and I was wrong, and I have spent 30 years treating those two things as reasons to correct course." He picked up a folder from his desk and held it out to her. "Because the research you've already produced in 3 weeks is better than what I've paid for in a year and a half. And because," he said, and something shifted very slightly in his voice, "the thing you did in that dining room, the thing you chose to do when every protocol in the room told you to stand back, I don't intend to waste it." Sloane took the folder. She opened it. She looked at the letterhead, which was McGill's, and at the name of the chair, which was, with a lack of sentimentality she found she respected, simply called the Mercer Research Position in Applied Pharmacology. She thought about Dr. Ewan, who had told her in an office hours meeting 8 years ago that she thought in a way most students took a graduate degree to develop. She thought about her mother's apartment in Laval, which now had the modified bathroom fixtures and the medication management system that Sloane had spent 3 years trying to afford. She thought about Theo, who was finishing his semester without the weight of a deferral letter waiting for him. She thought about the woman she had been planning to become before the accident on the A40 had interrupted the plan. "I have one condition," she said. "Name it. My mother's care stays in the Foundation's remit for as long as she needs it, not as charity, as an ongoing commitment, in writing." She met his eyes. "Not because I don't trust verbal agreements, but because people die, Mr. Vance, and institutions survive them, and I need this to survive you." Edmund Vance looked at her for a long moment. "Carrington will have the addendum ready by end of day," he said. She signed the new agreement on a Tuesday morning in May, in an office with a window overlooking the McGill campus, wearing the first pair of non-slip service shoes she had bought herself in 3 years because she hadn't yet gotten around to buying different ones. She made a note to do that. She had a research placement to start, and a degree to finish, and, for the first time in 4 years, the particular quiet of a woman who knows exactly where she is going and has enough runway to get there.